Today we are going to be canning butternut squash, and we have some bonus footage at the very end. We are starting with some fresh butternut squash from the U-Pig farm. The first step is to clean the squash with cool water and soap. And then in the prep area, you'll need a nice sharp knife and a solid cutting board. You'll slice the squash into sections to make it easier to handle. And I did start with a vegetable peeler because the instructions said to peel, but for all of the future projects I found it's much faster and more efficient to use a knife to take the peel off. The instructions say to cut the squash into 1-inch pieces, and since this was my first time processing squash, I literally pulled the measuring tape out of the kitchen drawer and I used the actual measuring tape to cut 1-inch squares of squash. Now the neck of the squash is solid, but the base does contain seeds, and those will need to be removed. You can compost them, you can feed them to chickens, you can roast them. But for this project, you want to just remove them and set them aside. And then you'll pour the diced squash into a nice big pot on the kitchen stove. And since I did want to fill the canner, I processed most of a second squash to get 8 additional cups. You'll then cover the diced squash with filtered water, most of the way to the top or all the way to the top. It never hurts to have a little bit of extra water there. And then you'll cover the pot and bring it to a boil over medium heat. You can see here the squash has started to boil gently. So once it has reached that boiling temperature, you'll let it boil for 2 minutes and then turn the heat off. And look at that. Now it's time to can. I have everything ready to go, including a water bath. You'll take tongs and carefully remove 1 pint jar. And then take a wide mouth funnel and place that on the pint jar. And then here you'll take a ladle and add that diced boiled squash into the pint jar all the way up to 1-inch headspace. And I did clip the video here a little bit just to kind of keep the pace up. So here we're just going to measure. There's that 1-inch mark on the measuring tool. And we are at 1 inch of headspace. And then you'll take half a teaspoon of sea salt and add that to your jar. And of course, if you're using quart jars, you'll use a larger amount of salt. But for the pint jars, for 1 pint jar of vegetables, you'll add half a teaspoon of salt. You can can without the salt, but it really does change the flavor, and personally I do prefer my canned vegetables with just a little bit of salt, the recommended amount. You'll then add liquid up to that 1-inch headspace. And once that part is set, you'll take a clean, damp paper towel and wipe the rim of the jar. Then you'll place a brand new unused lid and a clean, undamaged ring on the jar and twist until finger tight. You'll then take the tongs and carefully place the filled jar into the water bath And then you'll just go ahead and repeat until either you run out of space in the canner or you run out of vegetables. And this worked out really well. I have a nice full canner. And here I'm adding that 3rd quart of hot water. I do like to start with 2 quarts because otherwise the jars will just wobble over. So I just have to make sure to remember that final quart before I seal the lid, and then turn the heat on high. And once the steam starts coming out at a steady pace, you just let it go for 10 minutes. And then place a 10-pound weight on the vent pipe. And you can see there the air vent just popped up right in front. Now once the weight has started that hula dance, you'll set the timer and process for 55 minutes. After that time, you'll turn the heat off, wait for the air vent to drop, and then you can remove the weight. You then set the timer for 10 minutes, and then you can remove the lid. Here you can start pulling out the jars. You can see the liquid is actually still boiling inside because the contents are under pressure. So if you look here closely, you can actually see bubbles continuing to rise in that liquid as the liquid continues to boil under pressure. Once you have all the jars out, you'll let them sit for 12 to 24 hours. This video picks up the next day. We are now going to test the seals. So you untwist the ring and then lift the jar by the lid, and you can see the lid now has a perfect seal on the jar. You'll then wash and dry all of the jars and label with the contents and the date. Look at that beautiful squash. These are now shelf stable for 12 to 24 months. Here is the first quick round of bonus footage. This is Kabocha squash, also known as Japanese pumpkin. And it's processed the same way as butternut squash. You remove the seeds, peel, dice into 1-inch squares, process it the exact same way in the canner, and they're great in soups and curries. This is bonus footage number 2, which is called the Porcelain Doll Pumpkin, also from the U-Pick farm. This is processed the same way as all the other squash, diced into 1-inch squares and then processed in the pressure canner for the same amount of time. And honestly, the porcelain doll was my absolute favorite. It's sweet and fragrant. It's great in pies or pumpkin bread. Here I included a couple quick pictures where I actually sliced some of that porcelain doll pumpkin thin and then roasted it in the oven with schmaltz, and it was ridiculously tasty. This is the texture after canning. And here's a little picture of my son, and he's helping me mix up a batch of pumpkin bread. This is one of my favorite recipes. You can find it in The Joy of Cooking. Thank you so much for watching, and B'Te'avon.